What if television's happiest homes were built by people whose real lives were quietly falling apart? Behind the canned laughter, perfect marriages and funny neighbors were painful childhoods, broken families, serious illness, addiction, financial ruin, and losses no amount of fame could repair. These stars made millions laugh, but once the cameras stopped, some returned to realities darker than anything their audiences ever imagined. Before we reveal their stories, subscribe to the channel and become part of our classic television family. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball became the face of television happiness, but laughter entered her life only after years of struggle. Her father died of typhoid fever when she was 3, leaving her pregnant mother to support the family. Lucille later remembered the day through one strange image, a bird trapped inside the house, which reportedly left her with a lifelong fear of birds. Her childhood included financial instability, strict relatives, and little emotional security. When she studied acting in New York, instructors told her she lacked talent and should abandon show business. Illness then interrupted her early career, keeping her from working for an extended period. Her marriage to Desi Arnaz created I Love Lucy. Yet the real relationship behind the cheerful television marriage was far more difficult. Lucille experienced multiple pregnancy losses before becoming a mother. Arnaz's drinking, long absences, and relationships with other women repeatedly damaged their marriage. She first filed for divorce in the 1940s but reconciled with him, hoping their television partnership might repair their home too. It did not. They divorced in 1960. Even though they continued to love and respect each other. Lucille built an extraordinary second career as a studio executive, but her final sitcom, Life with Lucy, was quickly canceled and publicly mocked. In 1989, shortly after major heart surgery, Lucille died from a ruptured abdominal artery. America's funniest woman had survived rejection, childhood loss, private heartbreak, and a marriage that television had made appear perfect. Desi Arnaz played the successful bandleader Ricky Ricardo, but his real journey began with exile and sudden poverty. Born into a wealthy Cuban family, he watched his comfortable world disappear during the political upheaval of 1933. His family's property was seized, his father was imprisoned, and teenage Desi fled to Miami with almost nothing. To America, he faced language barriers and prejudice while performing whatever work he could find. Music eventually saved him, leading to Broadway, Hollywood, and Lucille Ball. Together they created I Love Lucy and built Desilu into one of television's most powerful production companies. Yet Desi's business brilliance could not control his private habits. Heavy drinking, constant travel, and repeated infidelity placed enormous pressure on his marriage. His children later described a home filled with arguments and emotional confusion, far removed from the warm apartment viewers saw every week. The 1960 divorce cost Desi both his family life and, eventually, his position at Desilu. Lucille bought out his share of the company, and the man who helped invent modern television slowly stepped away from the empire he had created. His second wife, Edith Mack Hirsch, died in 1985. The loss reportedly pushed him to finally acknowledge his alcoholism and enter treatment with help from his son. But the change came very late. Desi was soon diagnosed with lung cancer and died in 1986. He had escaped a revolution and transformed television, but he could never fully escape the habits that damaged his family and career. If these hidden stories are changing the way you see classic television, subscribe now and share this video. Your support helps us preserve the real history behind Hollywood's most unforgettable shows. Vivian Vance to audiences. Vivian Vance was dependable Ethel Mertz, always ready to join Lucy's latest disaster. Off-screen, she spent years fighting emotional pain, difficult relationships, and the fear that Hollywood would never see her as anything more than a sidekick. She grew up in a deeply religious Kansas household where her theatrical ambitions created conflict. After escaping to the stage, she became a respected Broadway performer, but her personal life remained unstable. She married 4 times, and accounts of her third marriage to actor Philip Ober described jealousy, control, and alleged mistreatment. During the 1940s, Vance experienced a serious emotional collapse and underwent therapy. At a time when mental health struggles were often hidden, she returned to work while carrying anxiety and depression privately. Then I Love Lucy changed her career, and also trapped her inside Ethel's image. Vance was younger and more glamorous than the character, but costumes, hairstyles, and jokes were designed to make her appear older and less attractive. Her tense relationship with William Frawley added friction to an already demanding workplace. After the series, she struggled to escape typecasting, though her friendship with Lucille Ball survived. Vance was diagnosed with breast cancer in the 1970s. The illness later spread, and she spent her final days at home. Lucille visited shortly before her death, and friends recalled their emotional farewell. Vance died in 1979 at 70. The woman who had played television's funniest best friend had spent much of her real life searching for peace and acceptance. William Frawley's Fred Mertz was grumpy, cheap, and unforgettable. Behind the character stood a performer whose reputation nearly kept him from getting the role that made him immortal. Frawley had spent decades in vaudeville, movies, and radio, but by the early 1950s his career had slowed, and he carried a well-known reputation for drinking. When Desi Arnaz considered him for I Love Lucy, network executives reportedly worried he might be unreliable. Arnaz gave him a chance under strict conditions. Frawley proved professional on set, learned his lines quickly, and rarely caused delays, yet his private reputation continued to follow him. His relationship with Vivian Vance became famously hostile. Vance disliked being presented as the wife of a man more than 20 years older, and Frawley reportedly overheard her complaints. Their resentment hardened even as their characters became one of television's most beloved couples. After I Love Lucy, Frawley found success as Bub on My Three Sons, but age and declining health eventually made him difficult to insure, and he was removed from the series, ending another long-running role. In March 1966, the 79-year-old actor went to see a movie in Hollywood. Walking back toward his hotel, he suffered a heart attack and collapsed on the street. He was taken to a hospital but could not be saved. Fred Mertz remained alive in endless reruns, while the man behind him ended his career aging, unwell, and separated from the television families that had made him famous. Bea Benaderet spent years making other stars look funnier. Her voice appeared throughout radio and animation, while television audiences knew her from The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, The Flintstones, and finally Petticoat Junction. For much of her career, she remained the supporting woman next door, respected inside the industry, but repeatedly passed over for the largest roles. Only in her late 50s did she finally become the central star of her own successful sitcom. That victory didn't last. A spot had been found on one of her lungs during a 1963 exam. It seemed to disappear, but by 1967 it had returned and grown. She delayed exploratory surgery because she feared her absence would damage Petticoat Junction. Doctors eventually found the tumor was inoperable. She underwent treatment and returned to the series, hoping she'd recovered. Viewers saw Kate Bradley come home, but behind the camera her condition was worsening. She managed to film only a small part of the following season. In her final appearance, audiences heard her voice while a stand-in was filmed from behind. Bea died of lung cancer and pneumonia in October 1968. At 62, the tragedy compounded 4 days later, when her husband, sound effects technician Gene Twombly, suffered a fatal heart attack one day after her funeral. They were buried beside each other. Gracie Allen built an entire career pretending to misunderstand everything around her. The character seemed carefree, but maintaining that illusion required discipline, while her health slowly weakened. Alongside George Burns, Gracie conquered vaudeville, radio, film, and television. Audiences believed Burns was the clever half of the partnership. He repeatedly explained that Gracie was the true comic genius. Her confused answers carefully timed, every pause calculated. Behind the performance, she endured severe migraines and recurring health problems. By the 1950s, the pressure of a weekly television series had become exhausting, and a history of heart disease made the demanding schedule increasingly risky. Gracie retired from regular performance in 1958. Burns tried to continue without her, But the magic disappeared. Their partnership had depended on the tiny woman who appeared to understand nothing while controlling every scene. There was private hurt in the marriage, too. Burns later admitted he'd been unfaithful once during the 1950s. Gracie apparently discovered the truth but never confronted him directly. The couple stayed together, adding another complicated layer to their famous love story. In August 1964, Gracie suffered a heart attack and died at 69. Burns was devastated. He continued performing for decades, but visited her grave regularly, and reportedly spoke to her as though she were still listening. Phil Silvers became television's greatest schemer as Sergeant Bilko, a man who could turn almost any situation into a profitable trick. In reality, Silvers was caught in a destructive gambling habit that no clever plan could defeat. He grew up in a crowded working-class family and began entertaining as a child. Years of stage work led to Broadway, films, and The Phil Silvers Show. Bilko made him one of the most recognizable comedians in America. Success brought money, but gambling repeatedly took it away. Silvers became known for enormous bets on horse races and other games, a compulsion that reportedly cost him large sums and constant emotional pressure. His health began to collapse too. In 1972, while appearing in a stage revival of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Silvers suffered a stroke that affected his speech and movement, threatening the rapid delivery that had defined his career. He fought his way back to performing, but the recovery was difficult, and later appearances showed a man working against real physical limitations. He experienced additional strokes and spent his final years in declining health. He died in 1985 at 74. Bilko always escaped by the end of an episode, smiling, plotting his next scheme. Phil Silvers could not escape the gambling, depression, and illness waiting beyond the barracks set. Jackie Gleason created Ralph Kramden, a loud dreamer forever promising his next idea would change everything. Gleason understood Ralph's frustration because his own childhood had been marked by abandonment and poverty. His older brother died when Jackie was still young, and then his father left the family and never returned. Jackie later recalled watching him remove his hat from its usual place before disappearing, a memory that stayed with him for life. His mother struggled to raise him alone in Brooklyn. When she died, 19-year-old Gleason had little money and almost no family support, and he entered entertainment carrying a deep fear of poverty and rejection. Success arrived through the honeymooners, but fame didn't create stability. Gleason became known for heavy drinking, overeating, smoking, and unpredictable behavior. His marriages failed, and his relationship with his children was often distant. He surrounded himself with parties and famous friends, yet people close to him described periods of real loneliness. His larger-than-life personality could fill a room, but it could also hide the abandoned Brooklyn child still searching for security. Years of unhealthy habits damaged his body. Gleason developed serious medical problems and was eventually diagnosed with cancer affecting his colon and liver. He died in 1987 at 71. Ralph Kramden constantly dreamed of escaping his small apartment. Jackie Gleason escaped poverty, but the emotional wound left by his father's disappearance followed him into every mansion, nightclub, and studio he entered. Art Carney's Ed Norton entered every scene with relaxed innocence, but the actor behind him carried physical and psychological wounds from war. During the Second World War, Carney served in the U.S. Army and took part in the Normandy campaign, where he was wounded by shrapnel in the leg, leaving him with a permanent limp, one leg shorter than the other, which fed into the unusual movements that later became part of Norton's comedy. The visible wound wasn't his only burden. After returning home, Carney struggled with alcohol and prescription drugs. Fame on the honeymooners only increased the pressure. He could make audiences roar with laughter, then leave the studio for a private cycle of drinking, anxiety, and exhaustion. His addiction damaged his marriage and career. Carney experienced a serious emotional breakdown and spent time in treatment. His marriage to Jean Myers ended in divorce after 25 years, though they later reunited and remarried. Recovery didn't happen instantly. Carney fought for sobriety and slowly rebuilt his professional life, and in one of Hollywood's most surprising comebacks, won the Academy Award for Harry and Tonto in 1975. That victory makes his story hopeful, but it doesn't erase the years he lost. Carney survived his darkest period and lived to 85, but his laughter had always been built around pain audiences couldn't see. Sid Caesar appeared unstoppable during television's earliest years. On your show of shows, he could become almost any character, speak convincing nonsense in multiple accents, and command a live audience without hesitation. Away from the cameras, he was slowly losing control. The pressure of producing live weekly comedy was enormous, exhausting writers' room sessions, scripts changing constantly, millions of viewers waiting every Saturday. Caesar began using alcohol and pills to manage stress and maintain his energy, and his dependence grew, until large sections of his life became a blur. He later described years dominated by alcohol and barbiturates. His behavior became unpredictable, damaging relationships and frightening people around him. As television changed, his career cooled too. The performer, once considered the king of the medium, watched younger comedians take his place, and losing professional standing while fighting addiction pushed him toward depression and isolation. Caesar eventually confronted his dependence and got sober. He returned for occasional performances and spoke openly about his struggle, refusing to pretend fame had protected him. He lived a long life and died in 2014 at 91. His survival made him different from several others on this list, but decades of his life were still consumed by a private battle while audiences celebrated him as one of the funniest men television ever produced. Gail Storm represented wholesome 1950s television. In My Little Margie and the Gail Storm Show, she appeared cheerful, energetic, and completely removed from scandal. Her earliest tragedy came before she could understand it. Her father died following a long illness when Gail was only 17 months old, leaving her mother to raise 5 children with limited resources. Gail escaped poverty through a Hollywood talent contest. Acting and singing made her a major star, but when her television fame declined, another struggle quietly began. During the 1970s, she developed alcoholism. For a woman associated with clean family entertainment, admitting such a problem could destroy both reputation and employment, and she suffered during a period when addiction among women was commonly treated as shameful rather than medical. Gail later described those years as painfully low. Her husband, Lee Bonnell, supported her through treatment, and she eventually achieved long-term sobriety, using her experience to encourage others to seek help. Loss continued. Bonnell died in 1986 after 45 years of marriage. Gail remarried 2 years later, but her second husband died in 1996. She spent her later years near family before declining health-required nursing care. Gail died in 2009 at 87, a quieter tragedy of a beloved star hiding addiction, because the innocent image that made her famous also made honesty dangerous. Young Robert became America's ideal father twice, first in Father Knows, best later as the wise physician in Marcus Welby, MD. His voice sounded calm, his advice seemed perfect, and his television families trusted him completely. The real Robert Young lived with depression and alcoholism. His childhood was unstable, the family frequently moving while his father struggled to keep steady work. Young found success in acting, but professional security didn't produce emotional peace. During the height of Father Knows Best, he was privately drinking heavily. Audiences saw Jim Anderson solve every family problem in 30 minutes, while the actor playing him sometimes felt unable to solve his own. Young later acknowledged long periods of depression and several suicide attempts. He eventually entered treatment and got sober, though recovery didn't remove the condition entirely, and he spoke publicly about mental health at a time when many stars still avoided the subject. His perfect father image created its own burden. Viewers expected him to have the same patience and wisdom as his characters, which made it hard for audiences to understand that the man behind Jim Anderson could experience despair. In his later years, Young suffered further health problems and reportedly developed memory loss. His wife of more than 60 years died in 1994, leaving him without the partner who'd supported him through much of his struggle. He died 4 years later, Don Knotts made nervousness hilarious as Barney Fife. Every shaking hand, frightened expression, and sudden burst of confidence produced laughter. Those mannerisms were rooted partly in a childhood filled with genuine fear. Don was the youngest of 4 sons in a poor West Virginia family. His father suffered from serious physical and emotional problems and reportedly struggled with alcohol. According to accounts later shared about the family, he sometimes threatened Don and created an atmosphere of instability at home. The older man spent periods confined to bed and died when Don was 13. Don's mother then ran a boarding house to support the family, and the shy boy entertained residents with comedy and ventriloquism. Performing became both escape and protection. Even after success arrived, Don remained anxious about his health and career, often described as deeply worried away from the set, almost the opposite of the relaxed professional audiences imagined. Leaving the Andy Griffith Show also brought disappointment. Don believed the series was ending after 5 seasons and signed a film contract. And when Griffith continued the program, Barney Fife disappeared as a regular character. Later in life, macular degeneration damaged Don's eyesight, making work more difficult. He also faced cancer and respiratory illness before dying in 2006, at 81. Frances Bavier Aunt B represented warmth, patience, and unconditional love. Frances Bavier had a far more complicated relationship with the role and with the people who worked beside her. Before television, Frances was a serious stage actress trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. She'd performed on Broadway and hoped to be respected for a wide range of characters. Then the Andy Griffith Show made her famous as a gentle housekeeper. The success brought financial security, but it also trapped her inside Aunt B's apron. Audiences often treated Frances and the character as the same person, overlooking the ambitious actress underneath. Reports from the set described tension between Frances and Andy Griffith. Griffith later said she sometimes had difficulty separating reality from performance and could be sensitive about jokes or direction. Years afterward, he said she contacted him and apologized for having been difficult. When the series ended, Frances retired to Siler City, North Carolina. Fans imagined Aunt B living peacefully in a small town, but local accounts often described Frances as private and increasingly isolated. Her health deteriorated and she rarely appeared publicly. She died in 1989 from heart-related illness and other complications. She had no spouse or children and left much of her estate to charity. Howard McNear turned Floyd the barber into one of Mayberry's most charming citizens. His slow delivery and wandering conversations appeared effortless, but later episodes hid an enormous physical struggle. McNear had already built a respected career in radio before joining the Andy Griffith Show. As Floyd, he became so popular the character grew from a minor part into a familiar presence. In 1963, McNear suffered a serious stroke that left the left side of his body partly paralyzed and made walking extremely difficult. For many actors, that would have ended employment immediately. After a period of recovery, McNear returned to the show. Producers and cast members adjusted scenes to protect him, frequently shown sitting in his barber chair or standing behind carefully placed objects, sometimes using special support so he could remain upright without viewers noticing. The result looked natural on television. Audiences saw the same relaxed barber, unaware the actor was concentrating on balance, speech, and movement. His condition continued to worsen, and eventually, he could no longer manage the demands of filming and permanently left the series. His absence was never given the kind of dramatic farewell modern television might provide. Floyd simply appeared less often and then disappeared. Howard died in 1969 at 63, following further complications from his health. Rusty Hamer became famous as the sharp-tongued son on Make Room for Daddy. He was only a child when millions of viewers began treating him like a member of their family. For 11 seasons, Rusty grew up under studio lights, and while other children developed privately, his awkward years, changing appearance, and mistakes became part of a national entertainment product. When the series ended, Hamer was 21. The childhood personality audiences loved no longer fit his adult body, and meaningful acting roles became hard to find. Casting directors still saw the little boy from television, But television no longer needed that boy. He struggled to build a life outside Hollywood. Work became irregular and he eventually left California. Reports describe periods of depression and difficulty adjusting to the loss of fame. At different times, he worked outside entertainment, including in the oil industry and a family restaurant. The fall was painful. Rusty had once earned more money than many adults around him. Yet he entered middle age without the career or stable identity his childhood success had promised. In January 1990, at 42, Rusty took his own life at his home in Louisiana. His brother later connected the tragedy to years of depression and frustration. Denny Thomas, his television father, was deeply saddened and reportedly blamed the entertainment industry for failing to care for child performers after their usefulness ended. North became television's favorite troublemaker as Dennis Mitchell on Dennis the Menace. His smile sold harmless childhood chaos, but the young actor later revealed that working on the series could be frightening. Jay's parents separated when he was very young and his mother worked long hours. When he entered acting, an aunt and uncle often accompanied him to the studio. According to Jay's later accounts, his aunt physically and emotionally mistreated him whenever she believed his performance wasn't good enough. The alleged abuse happened away from other cast members, letting the bright, cheerful Dennis seen on camera hide a terrified child. The production schedule was demanding, learning scripts, attending school on set, meeting publicity requirements, all while still in elementary school. When Dennis the Menace ended, typecasting followed him. Audiences wanted Dennis, not a growing teenager. Acting opportunities shrank, and Jay struggled with anger, disappointment, and the feeling that his childhood had been taken from him. For years he avoided discussing the experience. He later connected with other former child stars, received emotional support, and began speaking honestly about exploitation in the industry, eventually working with organizations that support young performers and their families. Joseph Kearns became unforgettable as George Wilson, the constantly irritated neighbor on Dennis the Menace. His booming complaints gave the series much of its energy, which made his sudden disappearance deeply unsettling. Kearns had worked for years in radio, lending his distinctive voice to dramas, comedies, and mystery programs. Television finally gave audiences a face to connect with that voice. As Mr. Wilson, he played an older man whose quiet life was repeatedly interrupted by Dennis. Beneath the irritation, the character clearly cared about the child, creating one of the series' warmest relationships. In February 1962, Kearns completed what would become his final episode. Soon afterward, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, sudden and severe. He was hospitalized but died 8 days later. At only 55, the production faced an immediate problem, since the show depended heavily on the friction between Dennis and Mr. Wilson. Instead of ending the program, producers introduced George Wilson's brother, played by Gale Gordon. Eventually, the original character's wife also disappeared, and a new Mr. and Mrs. Wilson occupied the house. Young viewers were given only a simple explanation about travel. Many didn't understand the actor had died between episodes. Kearns never received a final scene, a retirement story, or an on-screen goodbye. Red Fox played Fred Sanford as a man constantly pretending to suffer a fatal heart attack. The joke became one of television's most famous routines. His real ending would make that routine painfully uncomfortable. Fox grew up in Chicago after his father left the family when he was young. Money was limited, and he began performing in tough clubs where survival required confidence and fast thinking. Years on the nightclub circuit eventually led to Sanford and Son, which made him wealthy and nationally famous, but his finances became chaotic. He married 4 times, faced expensive divorces, and developed serious tax problems. In 1989, federal agents entered his property and removed vehicles, jewelry, furniture, and other belongings to satisfy unpaid taxes. The man audiences associated with junkyard poverty had earned millions, yet watched authorities carry away his possessions. Fox kept working because he needed income. In 1991, he joined the sitcom The Royal Family, hoping for another hit. During rehearsal, he collapsed on set. Cast members initially believed he was performing the famous Fred Sanford routine, and reportedly laughed, waiting for the joke to end. This time there was no joke. Fox had suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 68. For years, Fred Sanford had grabbed his chest and announced that death was coming. When death finally came for Red Fox, the people around him briefly believed they were watching comedy. Freddie Prinze rose from unknown comedian to television superstar with astonishing speed. By 20, he was starring in Chico and the Man. By 22, he was gone. Raised in New York, Freddie developed comedy as a way of shaping his Puerto Rican and Hungarian background into something audiences would remember. His appearance on The Tonight Show created an immediate sensation, and television executives quickly offered him opportunities. Chico and the Man turned him into one of America's youngest leading sitcom stars. Money, constant attention, and a future that appeared limitless. Behind the success, Freddie struggled with depression and dependence on prescription drugs. Fame had arrived before he had the experience or emotional support to manage it, and he worked long hours while his private life grew increasingly unstable. His marriage to Kathy Cochran deteriorated shortly after the birth of their son, future actor Freddie Prinze Jr. When she filed for divorce, his emotional condition worsened. In January 1977, after speaking with family and friends, Freddie seriously injured himself with a firearm. He died the following day, at only 22. The series continued briefly, but the laughter couldn't hide the absence of its central young star. Prinze had spent only a few years in the public eye, yet had already reached a level of fame many performers never experience. His tragedy showed how quickly success can arrive, and how little anyone understood the pressure, addiction, and pain closing in around him. John Ritter's physical comedy made every fall appear harmless. His own death came suddenly, during what seemed like another normal day of sitcom production. The son of country entertainer Tex Ritter, John initially considered a career outside acting. Once he entered television, his gift for movement and embarrassment made him perfect for Jack Tripper on Three's Company. The role brought fame but also typecasting. After the series ended, John spent years proving he could handle dramatic and mature roles. By 2002, he'd successfully returned to network comedy with 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter. On September 11, 2003, John was rehearsing on the Disney studio lot when he began sweating, vomiting, and complaining of severe chest pain. He was taken to the hospital across the street, the same hospital where he'd been born. Doctors initially treated him for a heart attack. His condition was actually an aortic dissection, a tear in the body's largest artery. By the time the correct diagnosis was made and surgery began, it was too late. John died that night, 6 days before his 55th birthday. His television family then had to perform grief while living it. 8 Simple Rules continued, and the death of John's character was written into the story. The cast's tears were not manufactured. His widow later pursued legal action and created awareness programs about aortic disease. Elizabeth Montgomery seemed to possess magical control as Samantha Stevens on Bewitched. In reality, much of her life involved resisting the control of powerful men and protecting emotions she rarely revealed publicly. Her father, actor Robert Montgomery, was a respected Hollywood figure who reportedly viewed Elizabeth's ambitions with skepticism. Their relationship was complicated, and she spent years trying to establish an identity separate from his name. Her personal life was equally unsettled. She married 4 times. Her early marriages ended quickly, and her union with Bewitched producer William Asher collapsed after years of working and raising children together. The success of Samantha Stevens became another kind of trap. Elizabeth appreciated the role, but grew tired of the demanding schedule and repetitive stories. When the series ended, she deliberately pursued darker television films to prove she was more than the cheerful suburban witch. In the spring of 1995, Elizabeth began experiencing serious symptoms while working. She was diagnosed with colorectal cancer that had already spread. She valued her privacy and spent her final weeks at home with her husband, Robert Foxworth, and her children. She died in May 1995 at 62, only weeks after the diagnosis became public. Dick York's life changed because of one moment on a film set. Before it, he was a successful actor. After it, almost every day included pain. While making the 1959 film They Came to Cordura, York was operating a heavy railroad handcar during a scene when the equipment suddenly shifted, causing a severe back injury. Damage to muscles along the right side of his back never properly healed, but he kept acting despite constant pain. As the original Darren Stevens on Bewitched, viewers saw an energetic husband reacting wildly to magical disasters. They didn't see the medication, exhaustion, and physical suffering required to complete the scenes. York became dependent on prescription painkillers, and his condition worsened until January 1969, when he collapsed during production and had to be removed from the set. He never returned to the series and was replaced by Dick Sargent without an on-screen explanation. His career nearly disappeared. York later described periods of severe financial hardship, and he and his family lost their home. Years of smoking contributed to emphysema, and by the late 1980s he required oxygen and spent much of his time confined to bed. Even then, he ran a charity effort from his home, using the telephone to connect homeless people with donated supplies. York died in 1992 at 63. Agnes Moorehead. Agnes Moorehead had already earned Academy Award nominations and worked with Orson Welles before becoming Endora on Bewitched. The role brought her greatest popular fame, but also overshadowed the serious career she'd spent decades building. Her personal life contained repeated disappointment. 2 marriages ended in divorce, and she had no biological children. Her second marriage, to actor Robert Gist, lasted less than 5 years, and reportedly ended bitterly. Agnes was deeply committed to her profession, and often worked at a pace that left little room for private stability. Though Endora became an iconic character, she reportedly regarded much of the material as lightweight compared to her dramatic work. During the 1970s, her health deteriorated. She was diagnosed with uterine cancer and underwent treatment, but the illness advanced, and Agnes died in April 1974 at 73. Her death later became connected to discussions about actors who'd worked on the 1956 film The Conqueror, shot near an area affected by nuclear testing. Several participants later developed cancer, though proving a direct connection for any individual case has remained difficult and shouldn't be presented as certainty. The established tragedy is powerful enough on its own. A performer celebrated for strength and intimidating energy, spending her final months weakened by disease, just as a new generation was discovering her through endless reruns. Alice Pierce. Alice Pierce made Gladys Kravitz's curiosity hilarious on Bewitched. While her character searched for proof of strange activity next door, Alice was hiding a devastating secret from almost everyone around her. Before television, Pierce had built a successful career on Broadway and in film. Her unusual appearance and expressive voice made her an ideal character actress, though Hollywood rarely offered her glamorous leading roles. In 1964, she was cast as the suspicious neighbor who constantly witnessed Samantha's magic but could never convince her husband, and the part quickly became one of the show's most recognizable. Around the time the series began, Alice was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer. She chose to keep working and kept the seriousness of her illness private from many colleagues. As treatment and disease affected her body, she performed Gladys's frantic reactions and sharp comedy without revealing what she was enduring. Viewers saw a nosy neighbor bursting through doors. Behind the performance was a woman using the time she had left to finish her work. Alice filmed episodes until her health made it impossible to continue. She died in March 1966, at only 48. Several months later, she received the Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, an honor that came too late for her to accept. Sandra Gould replaced her as Gladys Kravitz, and the show continued. Paul Lynde's sarcastic voice could make a single sentence funnier than an entire page of dialogue. As Uncle Arthur on Bewitched and the Center Square on Hollywood Squares, he became instantly recognizable. His public personality was loud and fearless. His private life was shaped by secrecy. Lind was gay during an era when openly acknowledging that fact could destroy a mainstream television career. He performed with mannerisms audiences recognized, yet interviews and publicity required him to avoid honest discussion of his relationships. Living between an obvious public identity and official denial created constant tension. He also struggled with alcohol, and his behavior sometimes became unpredictable. In 1965, a young man who'd been socializing with Lind died after falling from a hotel window. Authorities didn't accuse Lind of causing the death, but the incident attracted attention and became another painful shadow over his private life. His drinking contributed to professional problems despite his enormous popularity. He could steal any scene, but producers were sometimes unsure whether his behavior off-camera would create trouble. Lindy eventually reduced his drinking, but remained typecast as the sarcastic supporting man. He wanted leading roles and deeper respect, but Hollywood usually asked him to repeat the same personality. In January 1982, he was found dead at his home from a heart attack. At 55, Bill Bixby starred in several popular series, including My Favorite Martian, The Courtship of Eddie's Father, and The Incredible Hulk. His greatest tragedy didn't involve his career. It involved the destruction of his family. Bixby married actress Brenda Bennett in 1971. Their son, Christopher, was born 3 years later. Though the marriage ended in divorce, Bill remained deeply devoted to the boy. In 1981, 6-year-old Christopher developed a serious throat infection while on a skiing holiday and died after sudden medical complications. Bill was devastated. Friends said the loss changed him permanently. Less than a year later, Brenda Bennett died by suicide. Bixby had now lost both his child and former wife within a short period. He continued working, directing television episodes and accepting new roles. His calm professionalism concealed grief that never completely disappeared. Then another battle began. In 1991, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He underwent treatment and stayed active, even directing episodes of the sitcom Blossom while seriously ill. He married artist Judith Kleiben shortly before his death. In November 1993, only days after completing his final directing work, Bixby died at 59. Brian Keith's Uncle Bill became the dependable center of family affair, caring for 3 children after the death of their parents. His own final family tragedy was devastating. Keith worked steadily in films and television, often playing strong, practical men, and was also a military veteran who'd served as a Marine aviator during the Second World War. By the 1990s, his health was failing. He suffered from emphysema and was diagnosed with lung cancer, and treatment and age reduced the independence that had defined him. Then his daughter Daisy died by suicide in April 1997. Losing a child created a level of grief friends believed he found difficult to bear. Only weeks later, Brian Keith took his own life at his home. He was 75 and seriously ill. His family emphasized he'd been suffering from both cancer and his daughter's recent death. The ending cast a painful shadow over his best-known role. Uncle Bill entered family affair as a reluctant guardian and gradually built a loving home for children who'd experienced loss. The show promised that family devotion could repair tragedy. Brian's real family faced a loss that couldn't be repaired. Anissa Jones became famous before she was old enough to understand what fame could take from her. On Family Affair, she played Buffy, the adorable little girl carrying Mrs. Beasley. America loved her. Hollywood controlled nearly everything else. Her parents' marriage was troubled, and their divorce led to a bitter custody dispute. Her father later died, adding another loss to an already unstable childhood. At 8, Anissa joined Family Affair. The schedule required long filming days, publicity appearances, interviews, and constant adult supervision. Buffy's hairstyle, clothing, and behavior became part of a valuable television image. When the series ended, Anissa was 13 and exhausted by acting. She wanted an ordinary life, but ordinary life was difficult for someone recognized everywhere as Buffy. Typecasting blocked serious opportunities, and producers kept seeing the little girl with the doll even as Anissa became a teenager. She rejected attempts to use her former image and largely left acting. When she turned 18, she received money that had been held in trust. Instead of creating stability, Sudden access to money reportedly intensified her dangerous social life and drug use. In August 1976, Anissa was found dead after an overdose involving multiple substances. She was only 18. Her brother Paul also later struggled and died from an overdose in 1984. Dana Plato joined Different Strokes as Kimberly Drummond, the kind and confident daughter of a wealthy family. Her life after the show became a public collapse that entertainment programs often treated as spectacle. Dana's adoptive parents divorced when she was young, and she entered commercials and acting as a child. Different Strokes made her famous during adolescence, placing her inside one of television's most watched families. At 18, she became pregnant. Producers believed motherhood conflicted with Kimberly's image, and Dana's role was reduced. The career she'd depended on since childhood suddenly became uncertain. Adult acting opportunities were limited, and she struggled with addiction, unstable relationships, and money problems. In 1991, she entered a video store with a pellet gun and demanded money. The robbery made headlines because customers immediately recognized the former sitcom star. She later faced another arrest involving a forged prescription. Though she attempted rehab and occasional comebacks, the media kept presenting her as another ruined child celebrity. In May 1999, Dana appeared on a radio program and defended her life against callers who questioned her recovery. The following day, while visiting family, she died from an overdose at 34. Authorities ruled the death a suicide. Her son Tyler died by suicide in 2010. Gary Coleman was once the highest-paid child actor on television. By adulthood, he was working in stores, fighting lawsuits, and struggling to pay medical bills. Gary was born with serious kidney disease. Medication and treatment affected his growth, leaving him with a childlike appearance throughout adulthood, and he underwent 2 unsuccessful kidney transplants and required years of dialysis. That medical condition helped make him perfect for Arnold Jackson on Different Strokes. His small body, expressive face, and comic delivery made him the series' central attraction. Behind the success, he worked long hours despite poor health. Millions of dollars passed through accounts connected to his career. But Gary later claimed parents and advisors had mishandled much of his money. He sued them and won a substantial judgment, yet legal fees, taxes, and limited adult employment continued draining his finances. In 1999, the former child millionaire declared bankruptcy. Typecasting made serious acting work nearly impossible. He earned income through small appearances, security work, and jobs in hobby stores. His health remained fragile, and he publicly discussed depression and previous suicide attempts. His marriage to Shannon Price became troubled and highly publicized, with police responding to domestic disputes and the couple appearing on television to discuss their problems. In May 2010, Gary fell at his Utah home and suffered a brain hemorrhage. He died 2 days later at 42. Nell Carter filled Gimme a Break. With enormous voice, confidence, and humor, her private history contained trauma, addiction, illness, and repeated loss. According to Carter's own accounts, she was sexually assaulted as a teenager and became pregnant. The child was raised by family members while Nell left Alabama to pursue performance. Her talent eventually brought Broadway success, including a Tony Award for Ain't Misbehavin'. Television followed, making her the center of a popular sitcom, but fame arrived alongside a serious cocaine addiction. Carter entered treatment during the 1980s, trying to recover while maintaining her professional image. She also struggled with depression and reportedly made suicide attempts. Motherhood brought further pain. She experienced multiple pregnancy losses before adopting children, and later disputes involving family and custody became emotionally difficult and publicly discussed. Her physical health was equally fragile. Carter had diabetes, underwent surgery for brain aneurysms, and faced significant weight-related complications. Financial problems eventually led to bankruptcy despite years of successful work, though she kept performing, using humor and music to support her family. In January 2003, Carter was found dead at her home at 54. Medical findings pointed to heart disease complicated by diabetes. Bob Crane became one of television's most cheerful stars as Colonel Hogan, the clever prisoner, who outsmarted his captors every week on Hogan's Heroes. His secret life and unsolved death later changed the way audiences viewed him. Before acting, Crane was a successful radio personality known for quick humor and celebrity interviews. Hogan's Heroes turned him into an international star. But when the series ended, he struggled to find another role of equal weight. Audiences kept seeing Hogan, and later projects failed to restore his earlier fame. Crane turned to dinner theater, traveling between productions to maintain his income. During those years, he developed a private lifestyle involving numerous sexual relationships. He and an associate recorded encounters, sometimes using video equipment that was expensive and uncommon at the time. These activities remained largely unknown to the public until June 1978, when Crane was found murdered in an apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was 49. The investigation focused heavily on his private behavior and the people who'd traveled with him. His associate, John Carpenter, was eventually tried but acquitted. The case remains officially unsolved. John Banner made Sergeant Schultz lovable by insisting, "I know nothing." The comic German guard became the heart of Hogan's Heroes. The actor playing him had escaped the real Nazi regime and lost members of his family in the Holocaust. Banner was born into a Jewish family in Vienna. He originally studied law, but Germany's annexation of Austria in 1938 put Jewish citizens in immediate danger. He fled to the United States, pursued acting, and eventually served in the U.S. Army Air Forces during the Second World War. While Banner was building a new life, relatives who remained in Europe were trapped. Members of his family died in Nazi concentration camps. The cheerful actor, later portraying a German soldier, had lived through the real consequences of that uniform. This history made his performance surprisingly complex. Schultz wore the symbols of the enemy, but refused to see anything that might harm Hogan and his men. Cowardly, hungry, easily manipulated, and ultimately harmless. The complete opposite of the officers Banner had fled. Some viewers criticized the idea of finding humor inside a prisoner of war camp. Banner defended the series by emphasizing that its Nazis were presented as fools rather than heroes. After Hogan's Heroes ended, acting opportunities became less frequent. Banner retired to Europe with his wife. In January 1973, while visiting Vienna, he suffered an abdominal hemorrhage and died at 63, back in the city he'd once been forced to escape. Robert Clary played cheerful Corporal LeBeau on Hogan's Heroes. His small frame, musical energy, and romantic personality made him one of the show's brightest characters. The number tattooed on his arm told a completely different story. Clary was born into a large Jewish family in Paris. After the Nazi occupation, he was arrested and deported with family members to concentration camps. He survived Auschwitz and other camps, partly because his ability to sing entertained prisoners and guards. Food was scarce, disease was everywhere, and death surrounded him. Clary's parents and most of his siblings were murdered. Of the 13 children in his family, he was the only one of those deported who survived. After liberation, he returned to France and later moved to the United States, where entertainment gave him a path forward, eventually leading to the bizarre situation of starring in a comedy set inside a German prison camp. Clary defended Hogan's Heroes by explaining that the fictional camp held Allied prisoners of war, not concentration camp inmates, and that mocking Nazis could take away some of their power. For years, he avoided speaking extensively about his experience. Later in life, he became an active Holocaust educator, visiting schools and giving testimony so younger generations would understand what had happened. Jack Klugman gave television 2 unforgettable men, messy Oscar Madison on The Odd Couple, and determined medical examiner Quincy. Then cancer threatened the instrument behind both performances. His rough, familiar voice. Klugman grew up poor in Philadelphia and built his career slowly through theater and live television. He wasn't a conventional leading man, but his honesty made audiences trust him. In 1974, doctors discovered cancer in his throat. He continued working and initially recovered, but years later the disease returned. In 1989, surgery removed part of his larynx and one vocal cord. After the operation, Klugman could barely speak. and producers and casting directors assumed his career was finished. For an actor whose personality depended on his voice, the loss was devastating. Klugman withdrew from acting and struggled to communicate. He worked with coaches, forcing air through damaged tissue until he developed a quiet, gravelly sound. Instead of disappearing, he returned to the stage. In 1993, he performed in a revival of The Odd Couple with Tony Randall, his weakened voice becoming part of the performance rather than something to hide. Klugman later spoke publicly about throat cancer and encouraged others to seek treatment. Randall's death in 2004 brought another major personal loss, ending one of television's closest professional friendships. Jack died in 2012 at 90. Nicholas Colasanto. Nicholas Colasanto played Coach on Cheers, the sweet former baseball player who forgot names but understood people. His warmth was genuine, shaped by a life that included war, alcoholism, and declining health. Colasanto served in the U.S. Navy during the Second World War, then became an actor and television director, working behind the camera on series including Columbo and Hawaii Five-0. For years, he struggled with alcoholism. By the time Cheers began, he'd achieved sobriety, but earlier drinking had contributed to serious heart disease. Coach became one of the show's most loved characters, and Colasanto's occasional memory difficulties were incorporated into the part, making Coach seem innocent rather than weak. During the third season, his health visibly declined. He lost weight and was hospitalized for fluid around his lungs. Doctors advised him not to return to work, but acting remained central to his life. He came back to the set and completed his final episode. Cast members later remembered he had difficulty with his lines and appeared physically exhausted. In February 1985, Colasanto died from a heart attack at 61. His death forced the series to explain Coach's disappearance and eventually introduce Woody Harrelson's character. A photograph of the Native American leader Geronimo had hung in Colasanto's dressing room. After he died, it was placed on the wall of the Cheers bar set as a permanent private memorial. McLean Stevenson McLean. Stevenson became beloved as Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake on Mercy H. His decision to leave the series created one of television's most famous exits, and a professional regret he could never completely escape. Stevenson believed the large ensemble limited his opportunities. Although Henry was popular, Alan Alda's Hawkeye remained the central figure, and Stevenson wanted a series built around him. He left after 3 seasons. Writers responded by having Henry's aircraft shot down on the journey home. The cast wasn't told about the ending until the final scene was filmed, creating genuine shock. Stevenson expected greater success after Mercy, but his later sitcoms repeatedly failed. The McLean-Stevenson Show, Hello, Larry, Kondo, and other projects were canceled, sometimes becoming symbols of poor career decisions. He remained funny and employable, but interviewers constantly asked whether leaving Mercy had been a mistake. While the series became a historic success without him. In February 1996, Stevenson underwent surgery for bladder cancer. During recovery, he suffered a sudden heart attack and died at 68. In a strange coincidence, actor Roger Bowen, who'd played Henry Blake in the original MASH film, died the following day. Ted Knight spent years struggling before becoming famous. When success finally arrived through The Mary Tyler Moore Show, he was already in his late 40s. As Ted Baxter, Knight played a vain, incompetent newsman. The performance was brilliant, and the character's foolishness became so convincing that audiences sometimes underestimated the disciplined actor behind it. After the series, Knight fought to avoid remaining Ted Baxter forever, finding another successful role on Too Close for Comfort as cartoonist Henry Rush. While his career was still active, serious illness entered his life. Knight was diagnosed with cancer and underwent surgery. He returned to work, but the disease later reappeared and spread. During the final production period of the series, by then renamed The Ted Knight Show, his health deteriorated, and he continued performing even as treatment weakened him. Knight died in August 1986 at 62. The program ended with him, since there was no realistic way to continue without its central performer. His tragedy was partly one of timing. decades working toward recognition, enduring small roles and professional rejection, then achieving two classic sitcom characters, only to have illness shorten the years in which he could enjoy that success. Philip Loeb starred as Jake Goldberg on one of television's earliest family sitcoms, The Goldbergs. His career and life were destroyed not by poor ratings, but by the fear-driven blacklist of the 1950s. Loeb had enjoyed a long theater career and was active in Actors' Equity. His union involvement and political associations attracted accusations of communist ties, and in 1950 his name appeared in Red Channels, a publication targeting entertainers accused of supporting communist causes. Loeb denied being a communist, but evidence mattered less than suspicion. The show's sponsor demanded his removal. Series creator Gertrude Berg resisted for more than a year, refusing to abandon her co-star. But eventually the commercial pressure became too great, and Loeb resigned. The blacklist spread beyond television. Acting opportunities disappeared, and his financial situation weakened. He was also supporting a son with serious mental illness, adding to the emotional and financial pressure. Friends described him as deeply depressed. A respected actor who'd worked for decades was suddenly treated as dangerous and unemployable, without ever receiving a normal trial. In September 1955, Loeb was found dead in a New York hotel after an overdose of sleeping medication. He was 64, no note was found. His fate later inspired A Character in the Front, a film about blacklisted entertainers. These stars gave television its safest homes, funniest arguments, and warmest families. Yet their real stories remind us that laughter can hide grief, fame can hide loneliness, and success can disappear faster than applause. Which story surprised you the most? Share it in the comments. And before you go, like this video, subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover more forgotten truths from television's golden age.